Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to another episode of Mind the Gaps, where I'm here with my friend Janus, who is a really good friend of mine. I met through a call I do for Evolve Move Play, where we do circling and dialectic and other dialogical practices to practice relating and going deeper with each other. And Janus is a very interesting man that I've come to know. Um, yeah, how about say hi, Janus? Say a little about yourself, and then we'll talk about what we're going to talk about.
Wow. Hi, and thank you for having me. Um, yeah, I I know Jake through the circling group, Xylopus group, and my day jobs are as a psychotherapist and as a teacher. So yeah.
Cool.
What
Yeah. So
we're going to be talking about is the role of the imaginal,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about the imaginal, which if you haven't heard this word in the that way it's used, I want to make a distinction between the imaginal and the imagination. So I think the easiest distinction is the imagination kind of takes you away from reality, or at least is kind of a side pocket of it, where the imaginal actually affords how you interact with it. The easiest
Mm.
example is, if you want to picture, you can picture an apple or a sailboat or a rocket ship in your mind. You kind of see the details of it and you have this image in there. That's the imagination. But then when a kid takes a blanket and ties around them and takes a stick and pretends it's a sword, that's and then they start sword fighting and pretending they're on a pirate ship. That's the imaginal because it actually augments how they're showing up in the world. And so
Mm.
it's not something that's just happening in here. There's actually this stick now is a sword. That big rock over there is a ship. It actually augments how you're seeing the world. And you could
Mm.
say that's also just not real. But there's a way that we do this all the time. Athletes will do this. Sprinters, you'll say take off
Mm.
like you're a jet engine or a jet
Mm.
plane taking off. Or um, a classic example is in Tai Chi. Talk about feel like your feet are in rock. There's water flowing up under your waist, and then above you is in air to kind of augment how tense and how you move. So that's the
Mm.
imaginal, and how the imaginal is a huge, 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 huge part of how we actually see the world.
Mm.
For example, when you look outside, you maybe see this tree behind me. If I look out there, I actually only see one side of it. And I know there's a backside of the tree. My mind fills in that there's a backside of the
Mm.
tree, but I only see the front of it. That's also imaginal. There's what the senses pick up, and then there's how our mind shapes and frames that sense information and fills in a more full image of the world.
Mm. Yeah.
And so, how we do that and how we engage with the imaginal really has a large effect on our experience of things. And technologies that humans have used forever to engage with and play with the imaginal are story and poetry.
Mm.
And there's a way of when we enter into a story, you wonder, why do you love movies? Why do you read books? Is yes, it's fun, but why is it fun? Why do we like it? Why does it feel actually nourishing to us?
Mm.
Is it actually affords us entering into an augmented imaginal space that we can now bring back into the way we're framing and looking at the world and seeing more
Mm.
deeply into it.
Yeah.
So I'm reading The Hobbit right now, and Tolkien's a great example of this. Is we don't have magic rings or elves or orcs or all these things, but there's a way that when I try on the frame of that world, I can actually see things that do matter in my world, and I can bring
Mm.
them back in and
Yeah.
see and shape how things are showing up for me in a different way. So
Yeah.
Giannis does a really interesting practice um, of imaginal play in this way, and I thought it
Mm.
would be a cool thing for us to talk about it. So yeah, how would you open up and to say kind of how you got into that and what it looks like a little bit, and then maybe I'll ask you some questions.
uh, I think um, I think the way I got introduced to it other than being a child and playing and interacting with the world in that way was through therapy, where uh, sort of in the whole school of parts work, you will often have your eyes closed and then imagine talking to a part of yourself, or you imagine talking to your mother or your father or whatever it is, and just sensing how the act of imagining something and interacting with it meaningfully in a serious way actually afforded a deeper perspective and changes in my own emotional landscape. Um, so I think that's where it started, and then tying it up to the rest of the world, I kept thinking about how um, the relationships we have aren't just with ourselves, but also with the people around us, but also with our environment, where we live, our home, and all of like all these relationships, and that the capacity to do therapy imaginally, or it could also be used in terms of your relationship to the wider world, without it necessarily being therapy, but just to enhance those relationships and that web of interrelatedness that's present in an environment. Um, so how did I go about it? It started with way back reading Jung and reading the Red Book, and having had similar experiences without knowing what it was when meditating, where like sort of enter this world and interact with these characters that weren't really family members or didn't feel like parts of myself, but would just be these very intense sort of experiences, and not really have a language to it. And then learning about active imagination and doing that for a long time, and then doing IFS on top of that. And then what led to sort of what I'm doing today, which what I think is really like alive to me and interesting. I had some friends who spent time the in the Amazon and in the Shipibo culture doing ayahuasca, uh, where that wasn't the primary thing, and they have a practice that's called a dieta, where you develop a relationship to a tree over time, and you talk to it and you interact with it, and you have this flowing thing, and their belief system is that the tree will teach you. It's a master teacher. And there's like a whole metaphysics to that I didn't necessarily go into, but I thought the capacity to imaginally interact with the environment is something that seems important. So what I did was I just went through like a list of European trees, and then I spent a month with each one. And the way I would sort of enhance the imaginal quality is I would start by learning all I could about the biology and the botanical history of that particular tree. And then I would look up everything related to its mythology and folklore and uses in different cultural contexts, to sort of feed my my subconscious in a way with all of these different information. And then I would imaginally, as you do with active imagination, I would make contact with a particular tree and imagine that it spoke back. And what was interesting is that that actually happened and became a practice that I'm still doing today. And then spending a month with each tree, so it becomes this very intensive thing over time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So let me ask
yeah,
about that.
there was a lot. I'll let you.
Yeah. So, okay. So the sense of spending time with a tree And so
mm,
first, like you said, I kind of get the facts, like biologically, what is
mm,
this thing? How does
mm,
it work? What's different from other
mm,
trees? And
mm,
then finding the mythological and folklore
mm,
background. What
mm,
stories have people told about
mm,
these trees? Like you said,
mm,
it's kind of to feed your subconscious. So when you
mm,
do start kind
mm,
of doing this imaginal work,
mm,
it's not just some tree. It has actually some context for
mm.
this.
Yeah, yeah.
And then so okay, so when you do this, so when you're sitting there, you're sitting in front of this tree,
Mm.
and
Oh,
what does that look
I
like? So you
actually,
say,
I mean,
right?
actually, just do it at home,
Okay.
where I can just sort of like close my eyes and then imagine that I'm in front of the tree, and I usually do it with like an actual tree of that kind.
Uh-huh.
And I'll walk to it in my mind and just sort of be with it, and then start interacting with the eyes closed, sort of like an active imagination set in the the physical world, in a
Okay,
way.
okay. So yeah, let me walk through this. So you're at home, you kind of close your eyes,
Mm.
you imagine the scene. Maybe it's
Mm.
a park or in a forest or somewhere,
Yeah.
and then you see this tree and you imagine it like how that
Mm.
tree looks, the kind of bark, the
Mm.
kind of leaves, the
Yeah.
height.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Then
so
I,
yeah, what
then
how
I'll
does that
watch
go then?
it. Then I'll be like, hey. And then the first time I did that, what happened was that the tree just went, hey, who are you? And I was like, okay. Yeah, because I treated it sort of like as an active imagination, and I've had that happen before with when you're interacting with parts that they'll just talk back, and then what happened with this was just like they just started saying like it would say stuff that I hadn't thought of.
Mhm.
In that sense, and then just like having conversations and interactions in that and developing that relationship over time.
Yeah. So what has well, I don't want to jump ahead to that maybe. So all right, so you start doing this practice.
Mm.
Yeah, I guess I'll ask that. Like, what does that do for you? Like, what does it open up? What
Mm.
what is that made possible? Like, just immediately over the long term, and
Mm.
well, maybe what fruits does it bear?
Yeah, yeah, many different things. So sort of the sense of it now is the sense of being profoundly at home in the world and in the environment. Where when I walk down the street or when I take a, like I just feel surrounded by friends in a way.
Mm.
Um, and like on many different levels because there's a lot of sort of psychological work being done in that relationship in a way. And there's a part of it where the sense of how you can sort of like, I don't know if this is the right way of saying it because I don't want to like metaphysically pin it down in a specific way, but like if we just operate within sort of like a standard Western psychological model, there is a sense of perhaps on purpose projecting myself out into my environment so it feels like I'm walking around inside of myself.
Hmm.
That actually feels very welcoming and nice. So the sense of being at home in the world is very important. And at the same time, it doesn't feel like the phenomenology of it isn't a feeling of walking around inside myself. It isn't like, oh, this is, I know who I am. This is like me enclosed. It's a very open sort of system in that way.
Yeah. So this sense of being at home, like I'm
Mm,
imagining there's a sense of, like you said, familiarity, but not like this pinned down familiarity. Like you
mm.
said, like meeting friends. It's like I know you, but also like there's a lot I don't know about you, and I
Yeah,
get
yeah,
surprised by
yeah, yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, and so in the practice of doing this, like
Mm.
what kind of stuff comes up? Like does it? I mean, I I imagine that's a pretty
There-
big question.
There's so much stuff, like a lot of psychological baggage comes up and gets treated in these very elegant ways, in many ways, because it affords the whole thing about learning about the biology of the specific tree gives so many metaphors about
Mm.
growth and about how you orient towards the light, or how you um, get nutrients from the soil, or the way your roots nourish you, or your connection to other tree like the forest, uh, and how there are all these interrelated relationships that can become very, very clear when you interact with something like the metaphor of a tree, but
Mm.
in a specific way. That also becomes a reminder where I might go in and do very, very deep work on having been bullied in school, and like sort of like almost having a tree guide me through that, and like being in the situations and having these IFS type situations where there are younger parts of me that are being taken care of and being integrated, and having this very stable guide that's sort of like walking through it. So I can give an example, and it's gonna sound, but yeah, I don't know how to like. It's like I'm at the edge of what it's like. I can feel like my heart is racing a little bit at like saying these
Mm.
things because they're very intimate.
Mm.
But I worked a month with a hawthorn tree, and there's this whole mythology about hawthorn trees and sacred wells and healing of the heart, and you make medicine out of like from extracts of hawthorn berries. And like there's like all this weird, or not weird. There's like this whole interrelationship, and it's hawthorn thickets are like very tight, but they're big enough to let in smaller birds. But so they are like you can take things through them, but they still have thorns. So bigger things can't come through. And there were many things in that where it was like we had been through this whole month of like very intense work about like what's it like to feel that you have thorns, and that you're still sort of you can there's still space to be. It's not just a blockade, but there are points, and like this capacity of both feeling that the ways that I have thorns in many ways, and also the way that I interact with other people, and knowing that they also have them, and
Mm.
how to navigate that in sort of like a gentle way where I respect it, but still can sort of find a way through. So there was also this like serious relational stuff, and then and then I can't remember what it was, but I was having this. I was seeing sort of Hawthorne as like this beautiful woman with like this dress of all these colors, and she was like walking with me, and we were having this very serious conversation. And I asked her a question, and I can't remember what it was, but it was something about like, oh, what should I do or something. And she was like, 2 seconds. And then she turned around and sort of like disappeared through a hole in reality, like zipped down reality, and like whoop, walked through, came back holding a skeleton in her hand, like as a puppet, and like opening up the hole, like like using it as a puppet, and basically telling me, this skeleton, that's you when you die. And I'm like, like it was like a really fucked up situation. I was like, okay. Um, and then she asked me, like, is there anything you want to ask yourself? What are you worried about? And like the only thing that came to me was like, is my daughter still alive
Mm.
when I die? And she was like, blah, 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 like doing something with the. She was like, yeah, I think so. Like basically with the hand, but the moment of it was both absurd because we had had this entire month of this very serious, now we're going to do thing, and it was like a weird messed up sense of humor to like, this is how we're going to solve this problem. um and at the same time it was like, the only thing that I actually truly care about before dying is my daughter okay? And just having that so crystal clear, I was like, this is actually the number one priority. Otherwise, things are fine. Was just very important. So that's an example of it.
Wow. Yeah, thank you for that. I really appreciate the sense of being on the edge talking about this stuff because
Mm.
yeah, it's like in one way it's like it just feels like ridiculous, weird, imaginary friend play. In
Yeah,
other, it's like
yeah,
no, I actually really get to see in a
mm.
real way and connect with what's most important to me in a way that I
Yeah.
couldn't otherwise.
Hmm.
And and I and I think another thing that's really standing out for me is the sense of the 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 metaphors that the individual trees offer. Like that this
Yeah,
one was
yeah,
very thick and could let little birds in, but kept
yeah,
bigger animals out, and
yeah,
then it had thorns. There's a
yeah.
way that the kind of imaginal metaphorical mappings that each tree offers
Yes. Yeah.
allows you to kind of map that onto yourself in a way
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
see
Mm.
aspects of yourself and kind of
Mm.
highlight and make more salient certain aspects and like foreground
Mm.
some aspects and
Yeah, yeah.
background other aspects where a different tree would foreground different aspects of
Yeah.
yourself and background
Yeah.
other aspects. So there's a
Yes.
way of getting to show up to yourself in a way through these trees
Yeah.
that you
Yeah. Yeah.
and then now when you see them in the world it's like all of
Yeah.
that meaning that all that connection
Yeah.
with yourself is
Yeah.
now it's a symbol, it's a living symbol for it that you
Manifest. Yeah. 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 And it continues. It keeps on growing and giving and also interacting with each other over time.
mm,
Like I'll sometimes have situations where I'll be like working with a specific tree for like, and we're on a thing, and then all of a sudden like another one that I've already worked would like come in and be like, hey, what are you doing? And then they'll talk about, and I'm sort of like looking on as they're like do like doing something and it's usually very it's usually like very profound, at least and very funny in a way.
yeah. That's the thing that feels I feel like I'm getting really drawn into about this is the aspect where it is in the very proper sense serious play. Like it
Yeah,
is play, is fun,
yeah,
and it can be silly and absurd, and also
yeah,
it like really is giving you real access to yourself
yeah,
and parts of yourself in a way that you didn't have otherwise.
yeah, yeah,
And so the thing I wanted to bridge now is one of the things that's come out of this is
yeah,
you've been writing some amount of poetry that you kind of
yeah,
do this work and then like okay now I'm gonna try to write a poem
yeah,
kind of to encapsulate that
yeah, yeah,
experience and
mm.
you don't have to go into much of that if you don't want to but just I want to ask a little bit about the experience of yeah like what that part of the
Yeah.
process does to you like is it integration is it bridging what is how does that fit into this.
I mean, that part is a fairly recent thing because what I used to do was when I had sort of finished working with a tree, I would like write a summary and record it, and then listen to it to sort of reinforce the main sort of teachings of it, or the um, and then life happened, and I was like, I had a backlog of I don't know, like 10 trees or something, 10 months of work, where like a lot had happened, and I was just feeling like a certain amount of anxiety about having to like, if I had to record it and listen to it all, it would be very difficult. Um, and then I was working. I had started a new tree, and it was the elder tree, and I sort of came with this uh, issue of like, how do I integrate? And she sent me on this whole quest over a month of like going out and collecting a berry from all the trees that I had been with, even trees that don't actually have berries in real life, but they would like metaphorically give me a berry. So I went and did that, and so I went back to all of them, and then wrote a poem where each of those parts sort of could be synthesized in an image, and then I recorded that, and now I listen to that. So it was like a way of compacting all of this. Um, and I've been writing poetry for a couple of years now. So the writing poetry wasn't anything new, um, but using it in that way was new. And there was also a whole lot of when I worked with the hazel tree, there was, and I did the research beforehand about hazel trees and the history and the biology and the mythology. And there's like this whole thing about it is like, it's the tree of the bards, of
Hmm.
eloquence, where it's like you develop a relationship with the hazel tree, and then if you're lucky, you gain the gift of eloquence. You can speak truly and beautifully. So I had going through all of that, and the hazel tree. When I had started with that, I was like, "Oh, that's a cool thing. Can you teach me to speak and write beautifully?" And it was like, "Yes, but you're gonna need to look at these things first." And it was like childhood bullying, hardcore, and like having to forgive like these bullies, like really going into it. And I was like, "Oh, do I have to do this to speak beautifully?" And it's like, I mean, you don't have to, but if you want to say anything that's true, then you have to. Uh, and so we had gone through all of that, and I think that sort of colored the idea of expressing all of it as poetry.
Hmm. 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 Nice. Yeah. No, there is something, the thing that I'm really getting about this and wanting to highlight, because it seems important, and I could imagine someone being like, okay, yeah, maybe if you're super smart, that you have these wise trees in your head that can
Mm.
say these insightful things. Like, I'm curious, what would you say to someone that was like, yeah, that sounds all well and good, but like, I feel like if I did that, like, my inner trees would not have any profound wisdom to give me, or they were like, they would
Yeah,
just be like prattling
yeah,
complete
yeah,
nonsense. And like, yeah, it
yeah,
sounds kind of neat, but I don't think
yeah,
that would happen.
yeah, yeah. I think uh, I think that is like a real danger, or like that's it depends on what. Can I do like two answers?
Yeah.
So on one point, we can do like a like it sort of if it's like an animist metaphysics or whatever it is, then we can be like, maybe it is the trees that talk to you, and then who knows? Like perhaps they have good things today. Say perhaps they don't, and you still need to have a good sort of. You need to be clear about what you believe and what you don't believe and what you take in. As with people, I would say that's one thing. On the other hand, if we stay within like a sort of like a Western psychological framework, there is a concept of sort of the that an organism will tend towards healing given the right conditions, and that can look like many different things. But if you give it the right conditions, it will tend towards growth and towards healing if it's been hurt. And I think the idea of using a tree which grows and grows towards light as the metaphor, if the goal is growth, the subconsciousness will begin to go in that direction, whatever that looks like, given the circumstances. But I mean,
Mm.
there's always the danger of fooling yourself, and there's always the danger of like going down a dark path. But I feel like if you take your precautions and you talk with people about it and you keep orienting towards the idea of its growth and like healing you're going towards, then I think the subconscious will orient towards that regardless of your background.
Mm. Yeah. No, I'm hearing the sense of that you don't just do this in isolation, but you actually talk to
Mm,
people about it, and it's some, because yeah, I could definitely imagine a version of this where you get very locked in
mm,
your own head and your
mm,
own kind of destructive patterns get reinforced and stuff
mm,
like this.
yeah. Mm,
And so there's a way of one having, yeah, the intention of healing
mm,
and growth,
mm,
and I'm imagining a certain degree of openness, but like not too much, like
yeah.
a degree of openness to turn towards the things that
Yeah.
your kind of subconscious are
Mm,
asking you to turn towards, and
yeah.
also having a degree of discernment. of,
Yeah,
like you
and
said,
I would also
sticking with the
add, if you
question.
have like if you have any sort of history of schizophrenia or like that kind of thing, then maybe don't do this, or not right
Hmm.
now. Like that would be my advice. And if anything, imaginal parts begin to tell you to do destructive things, then don't do it.
Yeah.
So, but like, and the same thing with like if a friend told you to do something really dangerous or destructive, you wouldn't do. I hope you wouldn't do it either.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No, very prudent word of word of caution for for our listeners, also for me.
Yeah.
um, um, yeah. Thought I had another question in that direction, but I guess just because I mentioned it, and I'm really interested in the bardic poetry aspect of it. I
Yeah.
I want to also ask, like, kind of just outside of practices like this, like poetry or storytelling, for because in a way, what you're doing in this practice is a form of
Mm.
storytelling. You're
Yeah.
imagining the story
Yeah.
where I
Mm.
am in this world where trees can talk,
Yeah.
and I'm
Yeah.
talking to the tree,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
this whole thing plays
Yeah.
out. So
Yeah.
there is a way where it is a kind of storytelling, and there is a deep
Mm.
bridge between storytelling and poetry. And so I'm
Mm.
curious if you wanted to say a little bit about the value of those in terms of imaginal play and accessing
Yeah.
yourself.
I think they're very. I think stories are more than just entertainment, as you said in the beginning. I think stories. Um, there's sometimes the idea of like you. I have to be careful what I say. A lot of times, if you hear the right story, you can realize that you are that the main sort of, I don't know how to say this, like, but like the main character in your life isn't you, it is the story. You're just like a character that's serving a plot, or you're playing out your part in a tale that has just been told for millennia in different forms.
Hmm.
um and that can be very scary for some people, but it can also be very relaxing because you can be like, hey, it's a cool story, I'm here. Like
Hmm.
it can be a psychological map, but it can also be like almost like an orientation towards the world where you're kind of like, oh, uh, I'm
Yeah.
just in a story. Like it's like this is what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. No, no, I've heard a quote before that something to the
Mm.
effect of like we all live in a story, so it does you good to find out which one you're in and whether it's a
Yeah.
comedy or a tragedy.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah,
there might
and
be many different stories, but it's still. I mean, it's something I try to be aware of. And in terms of the poetry, um, I think there is a. Mm, without it becoming like too philosophical, there is a relationship between what's true and what's beautiful in many ways. And so there is a certain obligation personally that I personally feel towards trying to express what I see as true as beautifully as possibly.
mm, I
Um,
can support that obligation, that goal.
so
Well put.
and then also that a poem can condense a lot of it. It's like it's the verbal equivalent of an image, or
Hmm.
like a
Hmm.
film, or you condense a lot of information into like a few phrases that can then be sort of like a portal to a whole understanding or relationship that you otherwise have.
Hmm. 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 Well, yeah, I definitely like that sense of as a portal.
Hmm.
And hmm, I'm weighing which one of these things I wanted to go into because they're both really fascinating. There's something about the story aspect that you said that just sparked something for me that feels worth highlighting. That, in terms of a story, like different stories have a different feel to them. Like
Mm.
to see yourself as the knight going to fight the dragon has a different feel than seeing yourself as like the traveling bard going from town to town,
Yeah, yeah,
or as the like captive prisoner that the is being held for ransom, like, or whatever
yeah,
story.
yeah, yeah.
And something that just the way you're talking about this has
Mm.
me alive to is that I guess part of the ways that engaging with
Mm.
stories is important is
Mm.
while there is a degree of life happens to you and there's a way that there you don't have full choice
Mm.
over what story you're in,
Mm.
you also have a lot of choice over what,
Yeah.
you know, when you said you might be a role in this story and you're not the main character.
Mm.
It's like,
Mm.
well, the a side character in one story might be the main character in a different story, or it might have a
Yeah.
different feel, or it might have
Oh
a
yeah,
different.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I wasn't actually only talking about that. I was talking about it's not that it isn't even that you might be the main character in the story, but the main character is the story.
Mm-hmm. Mm. 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 Just
You're
want to say more
there.
about that.
No, that would like there's an aspect of it where it's like you're there to serve the story, not the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
like in
ooh,
some ways, like it can feel like that.
and
Yeah.
that feels actually when you say that that time that
Yeah.
really rings with the trying to say the truth beautifully. Like I'm
Yeah.
trying to serve the story
Mm.
being the best story it can be.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. And there are
Cool.
differences to stories, and like a question that I'll ask people, and it's not something I usually talk about in therapy necessarily, but like with friends, if I mess around or something, like if I ask you this question, like as a kid, did you watch Disney movies?
Hmm. Yeah.
Which one was your favorite? Was there one that that you watched multiple times or over and over, or a different story? Maybe it was Lord of the Rings, or maybe it was like something like that. But like as a fairly young child, like probably not Lord of the Rings, that would be a bit weird. But like a Disney movie.
Yeah, the very young child. Actually, now that I think about it, I think I watched. I don't know if this is just because we had it on
Yeah.
VHS, but I think I
Yeah.
watched Pocahontas a lot, actually.
So Pocahontas. Okay, good example. Do you remember Pocahontas?
I
Like fairly, like what happens in Pocahontas?
remember
Mhm.
the main
Yeah,
course of events.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So where, if your life was Pocahontas, the movie, where in the plot would you be right now in your life?
Probably I don't remember exactly the details of what was going on there,
Mm,
but when like the Europeans and the tribe are in I think someone's held prisoner,
yeah.
I think, and
Is John
Pocahontas is
Smith
like
is held prisoner?
I
Yeah.
think John Smith, yeah, John Smith is held prisoner and Pocahontas is
Mm,
like throwing herself in front of her father to
uh,
stop her from killing him.
yeah.
It was like
Yeah.
something like that part.
Mm, all right. So if that's the case, what needs to happen next?
Do you remember what happens next?
I think he doesn't kill him, and then they all make peace, and the Europeans go back to
I know
England.
that. I don't know how that happened. I don't know how we got from being about to kill him to not. Was it just because
I think it's
Pocahontas?
because is willing to sacrifice herself by the hand of her own father to save John Smith, right? Yeah.
Well, how that needs to happen in my life is a little unclear, but I do feel the possibility.
And I'm just messing around, but it's interesting how the early stories they it's interesting that you had an answer to it because it's so random in a way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's like the emotional tone of it or something, and the
Mm,
tension and
yeah,
the uncertainty and those kinds of things
yeah,
resonate
yeah,
with it. And yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Hmm. Wow. Well, Thank you, man. I'm gonna go rewatch Pocahontas and contemplate, I guess. But yeah, this has been really, really fascinating. I'm really glad we did this, and I want to start to wrap it up. And even though there's so many things I kind of want to pull on, but
Mm.
trying to do my best to keep these relatively short.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, is there anything else you'd like to say to just either
I mean,
tie a bow
there are
or
loads and I mean, I could talk about this forever, and
what's the truth that you could make beautiful in 14 seconds?
no pressure,
No
no
pressure.
pressure. I think I would say it's still there's so many opportunities of using the imagination and the imaginal to engage with the world, and that a lot of sort of current culture have died a little bit to that, where it's not a conscious practice for a lot of people. And it's not that it has to be like, now I'm going to sit down and I'm going to go talk to trees or rocks or rivers or pencil cases or whatever it is, like that makes sense. But being aware that it has a function in your perception and in your cognition, and just beginning to like play with that idea a little bit, I think is a good starting point, because you might be surprised by what comes up. Yeah.
I love it. Cool. Well, thank you, man. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.